You're listening to the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks.
Hi, I'm Dr. Brenna Hicks, the Kid Counselor. This is the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast, where I give you insight, awareness, and enlightenment about your parenting and your relationship with your kids. In today's episode, I am answering a question from Hayley in Australia. So, hello down under. Thank you, Hayley, for sending me an email. And she actually gave me a part 1 and a part 2. So she submitted her question, and then as a result of something that happened subsequently to her emailing me, she actually kind of gave me more in-depth scenarios and the situations in which she's struggling. So I kind of combined the 2 emails, and I'm going to read parts of both so that you can get a sense of what's going on. But basically her question is, she feels like she's doing everything that we talk about. So she's getting on their eye level, she's validating their feelings, she's setting limits, but the behavior isn't changing, and she doesn't see that the kids seem to want to help to solve the problem, specifically around them hitting each other. So she has a son and a daughter, and they seem to be at odds, and then they tend to get a little bit physical with each other. So 5-year-old boy and 2.5-year-old daughter constantly at each other and getting a little bit physical with hitting and things like that. So, Hayley, thank you so much for reaching out and giving me such helpful backstory on what's going on and sharing a little bit about your approach. And so I have some helpful insight for you, and I think this will be helpful for all of us, because inevitably we end up feeling like sometimes, even when we say the things that we think we're supposed to and we do the things that we think we're supposed to, it may not have the outcome that we're hoping for. And it can be a little bit tricky to figure out why. So I think this will be really helpful for everybody. So I'll read part of her email, and then I'll share some thoughts and suggestions on how best to handle it. The path to calm, confident, and in control parenting starts now. All right, so portions of Hayley's email include these questions and comments. I do get down on my kids' level when they're angry, and they both have a hitting tendency because they're very different personalities and are also at a very different play stage, and naturally they don't understand each other. I guess I'm finding that I do it all, but I don't see any attempt for them to try to problem solve or understand healthy conflict resolution. I need a short script for this because I'm finding they lose interest and move on when I'm hearing both sides out and I'm in problem-solving mode. Nothing has actually changed even when I set the boundary. They've been hitting one another at different times on and off since my youngest started walking at 11 months. In regulated states, I talk to each of them separately to reinforce the validation of the feelings. For example, it's hard being a big brother, it's hard being a little sister, etc. Even my oldest told me the other day he thinks he would be happier if his little sister wasn't here. I also try and play out scenes in their play to help them integrate the anger as it relates to one another, but I need help with how to do this from a child-centered perspective. So then she gives me a scenario in the second email. We got home, my daughter went into my son's room without asking. She likes to get into his things, and he got upset. We've explained that she can't enter his room without his permission, but she doesn't have logic yet, and she's testing limits. This didn't end well. He hit her. I briefly acknowledged how painful that would have been for her, and I went to check in with him to hear his side. It ended up escalating. It led to more rage, so I sat with him and let him process what had been building all week. So then she says, I contained the fire by taking him to his room and sitting with him in his room. I've not seen him express anger and rage like this before. His usual style in a response is to avoid or fawn, but he was throwing books, hitting the door, telling me he was going to hit me. I held the boundaries by holding his legs when he attempted to kick the walls, held his hands when he attempted to hit me, and explained that my job was to keep both of us safe, and safety meant holding his legs or arms so that he wouldn't hurt himself or me. He then told me to get out of his room, so I respected his wish, but I did tell him I wouldn't leave him alone and I'd be right outside the door. When I was outside of his door, I would gently say, I'm here, you're not alone, I'm not afraid of your anger. He then opened the door and asked me to come back in, so I did, and I sat there with him. But the anger and rage continued, with him throwing or attempting to throw books at me, and me gathering the books so that he couldn't throw them. I sat with it all, told him it's so frustrating being a big brother sometimes, especially when his little sister invades his space. He didn't want to listen, was trying to distract me. I told him I didn't care about the book. I cared about being there with him. He still had a lot of big, angry energy. He needed to move on. And in reflection, I wonder if I overdid it by holding the space for so long. I'm just so tired of the hitting and the hurt and the hostility. We need greater harmony, and I don't know how we can achieve this. Please help. All right. So Hayley, thank you so much for being so vulnerable and so thorough and helping me understand what's going on so that I can address some issues here. So I have 5 thoughts that I want to kind of unpack for you all. And I think first and foremost, it's really important to remember that words matter, especially when we're setting limits. So the neutral way that we phrase our limits is one of the most make or break parts of the limit setting process. And it's interesting that we just covered the limit setting skill this week, earlier in the week. So if you kind of couple this podcast with the Tuesday podcast, I think it will be really helpful for you to kind of see the limit setting process. But I noticed in your email, you said, I can't let you hit your sister. Okay. We have to be very careful with our phrasing, and it has to be neutral. So we don't ever want to say, you can't do that. I can't let you. It's not a good idea. That's not okay. You shouldn't do that. That's not allowed. That's against the rules. And those are all the things that we say as parents to kids all the time. But the child-centered approach is A is not for B or X is for Y. So we would say your sister is not for hitting or your sister is not for hurting, because it's very clear that it's just a neutral limit. There's no other nuance there. It's not, I'm in charge, I'm insisting, I'm enforcing, I'm upset about it, I don't want you to do it, I can't let you do it. None of those vibes are worked in. It's completely calm, it's completely neutral. You say it as if it's a fact, like the grass is green, the sky is blue. You state it as a completely calm, neutral, natural thing with no emotion from your end. I can't let you hit your sister puts you in charge. It puts you in a position of authority. It automatically creates a power struggle. And your child doesn't feel that it's a neutral, calm explanation. It feels like there's an agenda. So your sister is not for hitting, or your sister is not for hurting, is how we want to phrase that. So you're really upset that she came into your room, but your sister is never for hitting. You can choose to come tell me that she came in your room and I will have her leave, or you can choose to ask her to get out. So that is your limit setting process, and your words matter. So that's point number 1. Second is, I'm going to challenge probably most of you that have multiple children. So all of you parents of only children, you're off the hook here. But if you have more than one child, I want you to consider something. And I don't want to ruffle feathers, and I don't mean this to come across in any way as accusational or judgmental or any of those things. If you've been with me for a long time, you know how deeply I care about your kids and you, and all I'm doing is helping. So please don't shoot the messenger, but I feel compelled to point out a little discussed fact here. Babies of the family get away with everything. And the oldest child always, absolute on purpose, feels slighted. The oldest child always feels frustrated. The oldest child always feels that nothing is fair. And babies get away with everything. So Hayley, that's not an accusation. It's not something you need to feel guilty about. It's the nature of birth order. Okay, so we know if we look at the roles in the family and we understand how every person in the family adopts a personality and people respond to that personality, we know statistically, and we can look at research and data, and we know that babies get leniency and they get forgiveness and they get grace, and they very infrequently get punished. They very infrequently get consequences. And here's how we justify it. Well, they're little, they don't know. She's only 2.5. She doesn't know. 2.5-year-olds can abide by limits. 2.5-year-olds should have consequences for their behaviors. They should be age appropriate. We can't expect them to be developmentally above their level, but a 2.5-year-old can absolutely have consequences for behaviors. So when she chooses to go in his room, that is a choice, just like he's choosing to hit her. And they both need correction, and they both need consequences. So I just feel compelled. I'm huge into birth order, and I'm huge into the relationship dynamics that birth order creates. So I think it's very important for all of us to keep in mind an oldest is always going to be resentful of a youngest getting away with everything. And while that's not true, because it's not always unfair to the oldest, and the youngest doesn't always get away with everything, that is the pervasive perception of what's going on, which creates all kinds of resentment and frustration and intolerance and impatience and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that is a huge piece of this, Hayley. It's very important that your son see your daughter have the same limits and consequences and outcomes that he does. When she chooses to go into his room and violate his space, she's choosing a negative consequence, just like when he chooses to hit her, he's choosing a negative consequence. So that's a very important piece. Babies can't be given a free pass, even though they're young and they're the youngest. Okay, topic number 3. Rule of thumb from the parent coaching program that I use, child-parent relationship training. When a child is drowning, it's not the time to teach them to swim. So in both scenarios that you described, Hayley, your son was drowning. It's not the time to teach them to swim. It's not the time to have a discussion. It's not the time to help them sort out their feelings. It's not the time to understand his or her side. It's not the time to do anything other than reflect their feeling and sit in the pocket of their emotion. So we have to be really careful. They don't have abstract reasoning. They don't have their brain engaged. It's all 100% from their feelings. So when they are that overwhelmed by their feelings, it's extremely powerful for you to just sit and acknowledge their feeling and let that be enough. So we have to reserve conversation. We have to reserve setting rules, setting expectations, teaching lessons, helping them see big picture. We have to reserve that for a calm, neutral moment, not when the child is completely overwhelmed and upheaved by their feelings. So no discussion and no dialogue should ever take place when a child is overwrought with their feelings. Let me say that again. No discussion and no dialogue should ever take place when a child is overwrought by their feelings. So if he's losing his mind, throwing books, screaming, crying, you can set limits on the behavior. But otherwise, all you're going to do is reflect the feeling. That's what they need. That's all they can handle. So when a child is drowning, it's not the time to teach them to swim. Thought number 4, you need to provide choices for alternatives. So I heard your frustration. I heard you talking about how you feel like you're doing all the right things, but nothing changes and you're not really sure why. My contention is, although I'm not there and I haven't ever seen you try to set limits, my contention is that you're not providing them with alternatives for the next time they're in that scenario. And I actually talked about this on the Tuesday episode. So they have to know what they can do instead. So you can't just say your sister's not for hurting or your sister's not for hitting, or to her, your brother's room is not for going into. You have to give them options so that they can replace that behavior. So what are their choices? If she wants to go into his room, is it because she wants to be with him? Is it because she wants someone to play with? Is it because she wants a toy that's in there? Is it because she wants to get a reaction out of him? I'm not sure. You probably know that better than me. When he gets mad and hits her, is it because he feels that she doesn't listen? Is it because he's asked her 100 times not to go in there and he feels like he never gets her to comply? Is it because he's just so mad he doesn't know what to do with those big feelings? We have to get to the why behind the behavior first, and then we provide choices. So we might say, you can choose to come tell me that she came in your room, or you can choose to ask her to leave. For her, you can choose to ask him for a toy if you think that's why she's going in there, or you can choose to come play with me instead if she wants a playmate, right? You want the choice that's given to map to the original intent. What is the why behind the inappropriate behavior? Allow them to replace that inappropriate behavior with something that's appropriate. But they have to be given those alternatives. They can't come up with them on their own. They don't know what to do instead. They're just going to do what they've always done, unless you give them new options to replace the original behavior with. So it's very, very important that you not only reflect their feelings, you set the neutral limit, then you have to provide the choice and the alternative. And then you fall back on that choice. So if the child does not choose one of those things, then you fall back on that choice. You chose to scream and yell when she came in your room, but that's not part of the choice. The choices are you can choose to ask her to leave, or you can choose to come tell me that she came in your room. Notice that you're equipping them with other options so that they are able to stay regulated. Okay, and then last but not least, I think brevity might be your friend, Hayley, and it's all of our friend, even though we have a hard time with it often as adults. So the final thought, again, rule of thumb from the child-parent relationship training program, if you can't say it in 10 words or less, don't say it. So what I read through all of your email with me was that you spend a lot of time trying to talk to your kids about what's going on. But if you can't say it in 10 words or less, don't say it. They tune out after word 10. So anything 11 and on, they have completely checked out. They no longer engage. They're no longer receiving it. They're no longer processing it. They just see your mouth moving and hear wah, 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 wah. Okay? So it's very, very important that you are as brief, clear, and concise as possible. Because the more concise and brief you are, the more your child can actually hear what you have to say. So instead of belaboring the point and finding out what happened and trying to get to the bottom and how did that make you feel and why did you do that and what exactly took place and blah, blah, blah. They're 2.5 and 5. They don't have verbal skills. They don't want to talk to you. They don't feel good talking. It's not easy for them to talk. It puts them in their heads and that's not where they want to be. So the more that you can be extremely brief, extremely concise, give them very, very short dialogue, the more you will see that they are better able to receive that information, process that information, and then that will actually help them change their behavior. Notice that limits are very short. All 3 components of limit setting is less than 10 words. You're really mad your sister came in your room. You're really mad your sister came in your room. Ooh, that was 9. That was close. But remember, you can also just say you're really mad. You don't always have to have the qualifier. Okay? Your sister is not for hitting. That's 6. And then each individual choice is very short. You can choose to tell me, or you can choose to ask her to leave. Those are all very brief, 10 words or less statements. You have to keep things very short, sweet, and to the point, or kids check out and it no longer even registers. And then at that point, all of you are frustrated. Your kids are frustrated that you won't stop talking. You're frustrated that they're no longer listening. Nothing changes. So then everyone's frustrated. So do yourself a favor. And if you can't say it in 10 words or less, don't say it. So Hayley, thank you so much for the email. Thank you for filling me in on what's going on. And you are doing all of the components. I think with these tweaks, it will make a huge difference. And I hope that that's very helpful for the rest of you, because obviously when we face situations like this, we always feel like there are challenges that we can't always anticipate. And so having some extra tips and extra strategies are always helpful when we're trying to make sure that our children are able to comply with our limits. So hope that all of you are able to work on limit setting this week. That's your challenge. If there is a behavior that is unacceptable, rather than going to your traditional methods of discipline, I challenge you to use the 3-step process and set limits in the child-centered model according to the limit setting pillar. And I would love to hear from you. I would love to get some updates of how that goes and what your child's responses are, whatever you think you would love to share. I'd love to hear from you, Brenna@thekidcounselor.com. Don't forget that if you go to playtherapyparenting.com, you can sign up for my newsletter and I'll send you a video on the birth order workshop. Speaking of birth order, I know I just talked about it in this episode. So if you're intrigued, I'd love to get you signed up for the newsletter and send you that video. I am so grateful for you. Thank you for spending a part of your week with me. Thank you for working so hard on being the best parents that you can be. Thank you for investing in your kids, investing in your relationship. My vision is a world full of happy kids who become happy adults. And the way that we can ensure that and the way that we can hope for that is doing everything we can in their childhood to create the kind of outcome that we want, which is that they become happy adults. So be proud of the work that you're doing. Be proud of the investment that you're making in your kids and in your family, in your relationship with your kids. I can't reiterate that enough. It all comes down to the relationship. Preservation of the relationship, nurturing of the relationship, establishment of a healthy, safe, loving, accepting relationship. And that's why you listen. That's why you do the work. That's why you put in the time. That's why you send me emails. It's all to that end. So I hope that you feel very encouraged and proud of that. And that's definitely something to celebrate. So happy first week of April, and I will talk with you again soon. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks. For more episodes and to subscribe to our newsletter, please go to www.playtherapyparenting.com.